don't have so many topics tonight, so hopefully it won't take too long to get through. Hope you are all well, and good to see you all. Great to see Steve from Berkeley in there right away, in spite of the fact I didn't set up the show in advance, so that's great. And yes, like the video. If you think there's a better than 10% chance that you're going to like the video, take the opportunity now and hit like. Sergeant Boko, woohoo, yes, good to see you. It's good to see. Believe in yourself. Welcome. Who else we got here was Shizen Taisu, good, great to see you. Quint Rankin, boom. Steve from Berkeley, boom. We are exploding with anticipation and excitement that the show is starting. I come from circles where inspiration is king. My cup overfloweth, says believe in yourself. I don't know what that means, but there we go. Not so many topics. No, seriously, I really actually don't have so many topics tonight. Yeah, now that I look at it, I'm definitely not going to be talking about what the Pope just said. I mean, I think whatever I say about that, I'm going to get into trouble. And it would be with my my friends who like the Pope. So, yes. Well, let's go and do this chronologically. So I'll go back to like a week ago, and we'll go through in sequence. But yes, boom, Tai Nakamura, good to see you. Chris, dude, indeed, good to see you. And good to see everybody. Thank you for joining, especially given that I gave no heads up whatsoever. I mean, you know when this is, it's the same time every week, but especially Tai Nakamura, I know you've got to get up like early in the morning to watch this, so yes, thank you for joining. And yeah, so where are we at with this? Boom, 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 boom. So much gone last week, and I always mark the new episode by bookmarking where I had the last episode, so there we go. Channel Ralph, wow, everyone's flowing in. The JVlog 07, the JVlog 07, yes, Dawn, good to see you. Mogberry Pie, great to see you. Wow, Midnight Mixer, that's a new one. Good morning from Chicago, Illinois. Good to see you, Chicago, Illinois. Especially, yeah, it must be like, yeah, really early for you actually. Like, New York's 8:40 and Seattle's 5:42, so it must be like what, 7:40 in the morning for you guys. Anyway, good to have you along. Always great to see new handle names as well. Remember to say hello if you're in there, because I like to say hello back. Also, given that I don't have so many topics tonight, seriously, although I might talk for a long time about them because of that, if you ever want to ask me a question or ask me for a topic, do an @ Kiko Simon in the comments. I can see it because it'll flash up orange, it'll go blue like that, and hopefully I will see it and I'll talk about it, because as you know, I can talk about anything. I'm just getting over a bit of a cold I've had the last couple of weeks. Just the inevitable winter coming on, get the sore throat thing. I had that. I'm pretty much better now. But yeah. I did mention your name, Hiko Simon, somewhere near Chicago. Really? Well, yes, I'm famous in Chicago now. Thank you for that. How's it with everybody? I've been just generally really busy, of course, as I always am, but not a lot going on. I've done two things maybe this week that have been kind of interesting. On Netflix, I watched Ozark. Both seasons, just finished the second one today. Yeah, it's alright. I don't know. I mean, compared to like Narcos and stuff like that, it's not quite so great. I kind of watched it. I'm not sure I'd say, God, if you were to give 20 hours of your life to that. I also signed up for YouTube Premium, which is now available in Japan. And I do like YouTube Premium. So the things that I've noticed are, one, it's mostly for mobile. You can download episodes while you're on Wi-Fi, so I can watch them on the train without using up my bandwidth, which I really like that. So that's a big one. You also get the old functionality that the YouTube Player used to have, that you can actually just you can listen to videos even with the screen turned off. So it's like in the old days when you could just like listen to the music or whatever, or listen to the video without having to show the actual video playing. That's awesome, actually. That should go back to being a standard feature of YouTube, but yeah, so that's pretty cool. The other thing I like to say, of course, you get the premium content. Frankly, there's not much that I'm interested in, but I really did want to watch the Karate Kid, sort of sequel series, Cobra Kai, and I watched the first episode of Cobra Kai, and I gotta say, I had very high expectations. I mean, I'm a huge Karate Kid fan. I mean, part of the reason I'm here in Japan is because of the movie Karate Kid. It's just such a great movie. And I had really high expectations that were probably impossible deep dish. I keep hearing about Chicago pizza, and I mean, I love to go and try it out for myself and find out what they're talking about, but I don't get it. So now I heard all the hype about this Karate Kid sequel series, and I had high expectations, but then I was thinking, yeah, the problem when you have high expectations is that it'll never be up to the level that you expect. I do love Ralph Macchio, not just because of Karate Kid, but because he also was in one of my favorite movies of all time, My Cousin Vinny. You know, the thing about the Cobra Kai thing, it was better than my high expectations. It was really good. I mean, even all the ways I could have thought about this being the best it could be, it was better. It exceeded my high expectations. I mean, I'm not sure it's 1,500 yen per month. It says I've got to pay. You get the first month free, so I'm on the 1 month trial at the moment. I'm not sure it's worth all of that, but it's pretty good. Because MyChan TV, what MyChan TV is, remember, is that it's an organizer for subscriptions. It allows you to pick out video content from YouTube that you want to watch. So it should work. In fact, I should go and check it out that I can do this, but basically, because it uses a standard YouTube player, all of the premium, if you subscribe to premium, it shouldn't interfere with how MyChan works. MyChan just helps you pick out videos that you want to watch. So, for example, you should still be able to download videos, I believe. I should check all of this, but you can certainly see the premium content. So MyChan TV is still awesome. We're about to look at developing the second big build on that. Just going through the final bits of that, but she's in Taisu, behave. I can block you. Not that I did well. I don't know. You push me far enough. Behave. So yeah. Anyway. That was really, really good. I quite like YouTube Premium. I'm still not sure it's quite worth more than Netflix, which is how much I'm paying for it right now. I do like the extra features, but you know, I'm not sure I'll keep paying. Geez, that works out as being like $180 a year. I'm not sure it's quite worth that, but we'll see. Anyway, so and other than that, it's of course winter is now coming in Tokyo. It's December already. It's crazy. Fully into winter, which isn't so bad in Tokyo, but you know, getting colder. I am getting over a cold, so there's always something every week. I'm going to have some water while I do this. I see people talking about Tamlin Tomita. I don't know who she is. I guess I should watch something that she's in perhaps afterwards, but not that I'm that into Babylon. I'm not that into the Star Trek spin-offs, to tell you the truth, but yeah. Ariel, hola from Panama, good to see you. I guess buenos dias for you as well. Thank you for joining early in the morning. Mucho gusto, and welcome to the show. And Tai Nakamura, check out your track on SoundCloud after the show. It's called Rakuyo. And by the way, this is also a recommendation for everybody. I haven't done this for a while. I think I've got the links under the video. In fact, if I don't, I should put them in there. For Tokyo Digital Crew, and in particular this man, Shogunaitai, is his SoundCloud moniker, and he is a actually talented musician. He actually makes really, really good tracks, so I will go check that out, Tai. And yes, so into the topics for today. It's been a bit going on this week. There's been big news, but not a lot of news, so we'll see where we go with this. This is kind of funny. So take a look at that ship and tell me what you think it looks like. So China and Japan have a really funny thing. Have you heard about this thing about China and Japan as ships that look like that? Prize for all the people in the audience, first person to correctly identify the type of ship that is. In fact, I know that there's a bit of a lag, but go for it. Tell me what type of a ship you think that is. Well, Shizen Taisa, you are incorrect, and you're violating the Japanese constitution by saying that. So you are. So the J-Vlog has it correct. It's a helicopter. Basically, it's a what do they call it? It's a destroyer with helicopter pads. It is the Izumo, which is it's the largest ship that the Japanese Navy or self-defense, marine self-defense forces have. Now, Japan, remember, the constitution is not allowed to have, is not allowed to maintain armed forces for use in disputes with other countries. The way they get around that with the constitution is that although they have what looks like an army, and it looks like a navy, and it looks like an air force, they strip everything down so that they are not. So that basically they argue that everything that they have doesn't have offensive capabilities, only defensive. So, for example, they buy F-16s, but they deliberately remove fuel tanks from it, so they make it so that it cannot fly too far from Japan's borders. With ships, they keep them short range, and they would never have an aircraft carrier, because an aircraft carrier is for projecting, distance and projecting military power. However, they did decide, after the 70 years of slowly bending the Constitution little bit by little bit, that the Japanese Navy, Marine Self-Defense Forces would build a helicopter landing pad destroyer called the Izumo. And although I can't believe it's not an aircraft carrier, that definitely looks like an aircraft carrier, that looks very much like an aircraft carrier, they insist it's not made for aircraft, it's only made for helicopters. The Chinese did something really similar. The Chinese government insisted that they were not militarizing. They did not want to tip off Japan or spook anybody else around the region into starting an arms race. So when they bought a massive ex-Soviet aircraft carrier, they explained that it wasn't being purchased by the Chinese government, it was being purchased by a private consortium that was going to convert this now unused Soviet aircraft carrier into being a floating casino. And so they took this Ukrainian casino, which they floated all the way to China. They basically broke it apart, put it together again, and then made a replica. And they now have two fully functional aircraft carriers, which they purchased and shipped to China, arguing the entire time until they announced it was actually an aircraft carrier. They argued that it was a floating casino. I would argue in some ways it still is a floating casino. I mean, the Liaoning, based in Dalian, near to Japan, actually, Northeast Asia. So China has two of these. So they've got their floating casinos, and Japan's got it. I can't believe it's an aircraft carrier. Well, the big news this week is that the Marine Self-Defense Forces decided it was time to come out of the closet, as if it was necessary, and explain that, those F-35Bs that can take off and land horizontally, that they're spending billions and billions on buying from the US, they're going to swap the helicopters, and they're going to use the next generation US fighter aircraft on this craft, and it will in fact become an aircraft carrier. Now, granted, it's not like a traditional catapult, like you can see by the landing pad. Normally on an aircraft carrier, it goes off on an angle rise. So you can have some planes queue up and it catapults them off. This is just in a straight line, so it's not a traditional aircraft carrier in the sense of flinging planes off. But yes, they could have used Harrier jets anyway. They're vertical takeoff and landing jets, and now that they're buying a shit ton of F-35s, that they've decided to get the vertical takeoff and landing ones, and you know what, the perfect place to put them would be on our helicopter destroyer, which looks just like an aircraft carrier. So and I think you were correct. I think the Japanese Marine Self-Defense Forces are always very careful to make sure those are you can see those are helicopter landing pads and helicopters on there. So yes, you called it out correctly. That this certainly is, by every justification, a helicopter launch pad. The idea being it could be used, for example, if there was an earthquake, that you could put it nearby and have the helicopters help out with civil defense and so on. And it's totally not an aircraft carrier that could ever be used for waging war against other countries. Although theoretically, if you put a bunch of F-35s and some extra fuel tanks on it, you could probably do that. But yes, and the Chinese, who knows, probably all that they do is gamble on the things, but they are the official aircraft carriers, and the world's going insane, but at least we can have a laugh about it. And let's face it, I mean, Japan pretending that this wasn't ever going to be used as an aircraft carrier was kind of playing a bit of a joke all along. So there you go. I see people talking about the Swiss Navy, so there you go. So yes, here's another scheme. These have been going on basically since forever. This has two fantastic things that basically, in Japanese politics, although Japan has a mixed democratic system where part of it's based on proportional representation, so actually the parties that actually get the most votes get the most seats in parliament, but it's also based on geographic representation. Certainly in the upper house, and a mix of geographic and proportional representation in the lower house. And this means that there's always been a strong incentive to spend tax money in rural areas, because frankly, urban votes are just not worth as much. And for everywhere outside of Tokyo, there is a perceived problem that these small towns with depopulation and with dying industry and so on, they are losing people, and Tokyo is growing and small towns are dying. And there is a perceived problem of over-concentration of Japan in Tokyo. Too much political, economic, and population-based concentration in Tokyo, where every city in Japan is dying based on lack of birth and immigration. Tokyo has one of the lowest birth rates of any city in Japan, yet it has the fastest growing population, partly because foreigners move in here, but also because people who leave their dying towns all come to Tokyo as well. So any excuse to basically give money to local people, it works in both the respects of working as a kickback for people trying to get votes in local constituencies where those votes are a lot more valuable. Plus, it's basically, this is the point that they're at, that they will give 3 million yen to families looking to set up a house outside of Tokyo. The definition of this isn't quite clear yet. 33 million yen, by the way, is equivalent to about $30,000 US. So the idea is it would cover your moving costs and maybe a deposit on a house and setting up. Yeah. That said, I wouldn't take it, but that's obviously, I've got a job and everything. Certainly there are more and more jobs where you can work remotely, and cost of living can be cheaper outside of Tokyo. Generally speaking, wages are not as good, and there's less to do, and these towns are dying and full of old people. And this is the other thing, these towns full of old people, they want the young people to stay because they need them for the tax revenue, they need them for the economy, and they need them to look after the old people. But all the more reason why, if you're in a town that was dying because of that you would want to move. And frankly, getting paid $30,000, well, again, if you're going specifically there for specific work, it would probably be it would help make that decision if you were tossing up between two jobs of otherwise equal value within Tokyo and outside of Tokyo. But it goes to show you how pretty much desperate people are as well. If you want to come to Japan, I would always say to anybody, as much as I love Tokyo, and I've lived here 20 years, I'd say to anyone coming to Japan for the first time and who really wants to live in Japan, Tokyo will always be here, and Tokyo will always be awesome, but Tokyo will always be very desperate, desperately different to like everywhere else. It's its own thing, it's distinct. Why did I say desperate? I meant to say distinct. I don't know why that came out like that. These other towns are desperate, that they're obviously paying people to leave. But I would also say, in any case, if you really want to get a real sense of Japanese culture, especially something close to the way I experienced it when I first came to Japan, I didn't come to Tokyo at first, and I'm really glad I didn't. In Tokyo, you're normal. Tokyo's a big city, and you can live in a big city like Paris, London, New York, Tokyo, Los Angeles, whatever, and you can have all the great experiences and advantages of living in a big city, and you'll get a bit of Japanese culture and everything from that, but you'll have a entirely better and more beneficial experience, especially for living long-term in Japan, including in Tokyo, if you do not live in Tokyo when you first get to Japan. But that said, if you really want to seriously live in Japan, it's the same as in any country. It's the debate between living in a small rural town or in a big city. It's just the same considerations. You've got friendly people, good quality of living in small towns, and you've got, just great jobs and fantastic things to do. In big cities. I couldn't imagine moving up, unless perhaps if we got more into, I think what's going to really change this is not going to be bribes like this. It's going to be self-driving cars, more remote working. It's going to be basically faster internet, artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, all that sort of thing is going to make it easier to work, live further away from the center of cities. Although at the same time it still might have an aggregating influence. I think in the end of the day that's what's going to work, but at the same time, as Mogberry Pie says, if you can get good internet and deliveries, which is also now starting to come into question with the post office not being able to staff its offices, but there again, if they get benefits like this, maybe they can do that, especially if you can send robots around to deliver stuff, if that doesn't become a barrier. Yeah, maybe, and again, this is why, where most countries are fearing like the coming great automation that's going to happen. In Japan, it could really be what actually saves Japan. Japan's actually needs it. it, the population crunch here is so great. So we could see, as a general optimist, I think that we can probably see, to the extent that there's going to be beneficial outcomes to be had from mass automation. I think probably Japan's going to bring them, and it's going to be in things like this. But for that said, for $30,000 to move out of Tokyo, nah. I mean, also, I don't know if foreigners can get it. I mean, there's the question: if a foreigner got it, they might just take it and then leave the country after a few months. So yeah, I don't know how that works. I guess for permanent residents, they should let us take it. But interesting anyway. Yes. So I mean, they pretty much confirmed this. But there we go. There's a helicopter destroyer, is what it's called. But that's an aircraft carrier, and it's going to be now that they're going to buy a bunch of those F-35s. And hello, Mono the Fox, good to see you. Maybe Japan should reinstate the Saikin Kotai system to force Tokyoites into the country every now and then. Well, yes, I mean, hey, it worked out really well in Vietnam and Cambodia and in Mao's China, didn't it? Yeah, I think that would be a great idea to force people into the countryside and get them working on collective farms. And no, I don't think that would be a good idea. I mean, I get where you're coming from, and I get that you're not advocating for a great leap backwards. Yeah, and I know that they do that with bureaucrats. They do it with teachers and civil servants and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I don't think that would be cool or necessary. And look at it. I mean, the benefit. Granted, I'm biased. I love Tokyo and I want to stay here, and I think Tokyo is awesome. But I can also see the benefits from an ecological perspective. The fact that Japan has has more native forest and more untouched surface area than New Zealand has. New Zealand promotes itself as a country that's like this, empty, wild, natural country. Japan is more wild and natural than New Zealand. New Zealand, we've stripped and burned everything for agriculture. I mean, we've got lovely mountains, but so does Japan. And Japan and New Zealand are the same size. Japan is 120 million people, and yet, Japanese is just Japanese. They're much more efficient. They cram into smaller spaces. They're all in Tokyo. Tokyo is smaller than Auckland, the city I came from, that has 1 million people. Tokyo has 25, 30 million people in the same space that Auckland has 1 million. So, yeah, I think, it's good that people are getting out and leaving these towns to go back to sort of being nature. Maybe that's how we should enjoy rural areas, is by, going out and experiencing them, by being within a really energy efficient and compact and environmentally friendly city. New Zealand also fines everyone for importing honey or bees and stuff. You don't get it. Shizentai, so that's because New Zealand has a huge honey industry. And people bringing in diseased honey can basically wipe out. It's an island country, so it's dependent on agriculture. So if you import, bee diseases or honey diseases from other countries, it can undermine and we've got a very strong and profitable honey economy in New Zealand, so that's why they're really touchy. Same with Australia. If you get caught bringing like raw food into New Zealand or Australia, you can actually get into a ton of trouble. You'll get fined and into a lot of trouble, but if you do it on a big scale, you can even go to jail for it. So yes, there you go. I don't know why I'm being so touchy about that either. I haven't lived there for 20 years, but yeah. I saw something today which actually said New Zealand was like 5 million people. When I left, it was like 3 million people. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, I did do something interesting. That reminds me. Yesterday, I went for actual special training at the... Oh, yeah, I could tell you guys about this. It's kind of interesting. Boom. That is a lawyer's guide for assisting people going through refugee applications in Japan. So there was a seminar for lawyers in Japan, international and domestic, basically, who are involved in volunteering to help refugees make applications for asylum in Japan. As you may know, I mean, Japan had 20,000 applications last year and accepted about 30. And yes, I could go into the depth of that, but for me it comes down to, apart from the fact it's something that I'm qualified to help with, and to the extent that there are legitimate asylum seekers, and Japan is a treaty member of the Human Rights Treaty, the UNHCR is headed up and funds the UNHCR, and the fact that back in my own history I have people who have immigrated as refugees. in my own family tree. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for a system like this. And it's this point that and, you think that you're far away from it, but I've got friends in New Zealand from, for example, Chinese Indonesians who had to leave massacres of Chinese there in 1997. I've got friends from Vietnam who escaped on boats at the end of the Vietnam War, and were, whose parents did. And this is happening all over the world at the moment. And to the extent that you have people who are legitimately escaping for their lives. I mean, when we had the Great East Japan earthquake here, that wasn't a war, but it was a reminder of what it might be like, that you suddenly have to leave a place through no choice or fault of your own. And imagine that in a situation where it's not just nature or radiation, but it's actually people, the government breaking down and going around and massacring people at random. We have a system that we agree, a bunch of countries agree that when your citizens go to other countries looking for this help, that you'll take them in if they meet certain criteria. And you do that because you never know when your own people are going to be in the same situation. An idiot, you assume in Japan or in America or in New Zealand that we're not going to become refugees and need this, but you don't know, seriously. Like even in Japan, the generation during the war and after the war, what they went through with the withdrawal, 35 million Japanese refugees caught on the mainland at the end of World War II, and not soldiers, like regular people, and people caught on other islands. The ones that were in Sakhalin, the ones that were in the pre-war Japanese territories, ended up in Siberia for 30 years. The ones in China, some of the kids that were left behind when the parents escaped, all sorts of stuff. And this is like 1 generation, 2 generations ago. It happens. And so the fact that what Japan's doing isn't good enough. I'm not saying that you just let anybody in without checking them or whatever, but to the extent that they're legitimate asylum seekers, I would have signed up for that. And to the extent I can help people with legitimate applications actually get their applications properly made and not wrongfully rejected, I'm actually quite happy to do that. So hopefully there's something I can do. That was pretty good. Langley Esquire is indeed the man. His channel is indeed a gold mine. I recommend anyone interested in Japanese politics to go see it. Gravelly voice again. She's enticed. I get excited by Langley Esquire as well. I highly recommend to everybody to go and subscribe to Langley Esquire and to go tell him that I said to everybody to do that, and that he needs to pay me for saying that. So but seriously, his channel is very, very good, and you should definitely all go watch it. Back to this, I did sign up, as I said earlier, for YouTube Premium. I downloaded Cobra Kai and I loved it. I thought it was really, really good. Now this is the old chestnut about the detention scam that the police do. So I won't go into the whole merits of the whole Ghosn case at the moment. Like I said, it's up in the air. The updates, I suppose, are as you know, last week Ghosn was detained all of a sudden by Japanese police for basically it was taken as sort of corporate fraud. The specifics of the fraud were that he was basically untruthful about compensation, future compensation that he was that was in basically the company was planning to compensate him in the future. So he declared his salary as being XXX and was paying tax against that. However, they found evidence through an internal investigation in Nissan that there were plans to give him certain future compensations that were not declared. There was an argument that those future compensations were supposed to be declared and taxed, and that they had to be in shareholder reports, and they were not in there. And this apparently there was the result of an internal whistleblower who was shocked at the compensation that Ghosn was getting. There's a general, as I've talked about before, real resentment at the average executive in Japan, and even at Nissan. They actually showed the stats on this. The average board member at Nissan makes between 100 and 200k per year. That's the board. That's the company president level. Now Ghosn was getting between 10 million and as much as $80 million. So even his reported salary was kind of outrageous to most of the staff there, especially when the company was making so many cuts. But to hear that he was reporting he was getting 10 million salary, and that there were plans to give him 50 million, and a whistleblower probably who saw the documents about this being drafted, and they started an internal investigation. The CEO, on the same day that Ghosn was arrested, the CEO who reports to Ghosn did a press conference saying that we were all shocked by the findings of the internal investigation, and we're going to try to rebuild the company from now on, basically throwing Ghosn under the bus, implying that he probably led the internal investigation. And again, it was pure resentment at his salary, really. Him and I think his name is Gene Kelly or whatever, not Gene Kelly, but maybe it is Gene Kelly, the two guys anyway, Ghosn and his lieutenant, have been in detention. The police, as they do, they can hold you. So basically, I've said this before, but recap: when you're detained in Japan, police can detain you for 10 days. Now, in most countries, most common law countries, Canada, America, Britain, Australia, if you are held by police, even with access to a lawyer and with separate police staff that look after your welfare and make sure you're being properly treated and that you get rest, even with all of that, if you're held for more than 3 days, so many unreliable confessions have come out that have been contradicted by evidence or have been claimed to be coerced after 72 hours that, basically speaking, police are not allowed to detain people without charging them for more than 72 hours. And confessions gained after 72 hours are presumed to be, not reliable. So this is a big challenge for police in other countries. In Japan, it's somewhat different. They can hold you for 10 days. No one looks after the only person who looks after the welfare of the prisoner is the same person who's interrogating. The interrogator looks after the welfare of the prisoner. You have no right to a lawyer. You have no right to remain silent. And what the police do, especially in high-profile cases like this, is in order to put pressure on the prisoners as they are interrogating them for 10 days, they basically leak out stories about what they said in the interrogations to the press to basically create external pressure for them to basically confess. And then they get the 99.2% conviction rate based on the fact that people confess. Everyone confesses, and we know this statistically is not a weird statistic, because we know if you hold people for more than 72 hours, most people, even if you're innocent, even of things like murder, people confess, and they can hold anyone for 10 days. But it's actually even better than that. It's funnier than that, because with serious crimes in Japan like murder, what Japanese police will routinely do is, when they hold you for questioning for 10 days without your lawyer, without sleep, and without being fed properly and being interrogated by these police, if it's a serious crime, the police will actually, rather than letting you go after 10 days, if they don't get what they want, what they'll do is they won't come out with the main charge that they want to charge you with. And this is most often seen in every murder case, basically. Whenever they arrest someone for a suspected murder, they never hold them for questioning in connection with murder. They always hold them in questioning in connection with improper handling of a corpse. So if they think that this person is responsible for murdering, the first thing they charge them with is not the murder. They handle them with mishandling the corpse, and the idea being, if they don't confess after 10 days, they'll keep coming up with other things, and just to extend the questioning. So they'll go from the first 10 days to another 10 days. Where eventually they'll get to actually charging them with the murder, but that will be the last thing. There was a thing, Jake Adelstein pointed this out, and reminded me. I read this a while ago, but as I recall, when the Aum Shinrikyo cult was raided for the nerve gas attacks on the Tokyo subway system, as well as nerve gassing a town in near Tokyo, as well as kidnapping a Japanese lawyer and his family and murdering them all, and murdering members who left the cult, where they finally arrested the cult lead of the Aum Shinrikyo cult, and they detained him. The first thing that they charged a mass murdering cult leader who nerve gassed the Tokyo subway system, the first thing they charged him with was possession of an unregistered sword. Which sounds serious, but what it actually was in the religious compound they found a paper-cutting guillotine. Now in Japan, you're not allowed to have any type of blade longer than, I think the number is something like 6 centimeters or something like that. An unsheathed blade longer than 6 centimeters is basically the same as carrying an unlicensed gun. It's treated as an illegal weapon. They charged him with having a paper-cutting guillotine with a blade that was longer than 6 centimeters, and they held him on that for the first 10 days. And sometimes they hold them, interrogating them non-stop for weeks, months. Question as to whether people die in these things. I think if you look up amnesty reports, there are suspicious deaths that happen. Not regularly, and you don't see them coming up a lot. And I believe these things were they would happen more often, and they would happen in cases. I've read of cases in the 90s, before I came to Japan, of cases where people had asphyxiated, like people had actually had like socks and stuff pushed into their mouths while they're being interrogated. But for a long time. So the thing is, when you get people in Japan who don't confess, and a great case is the curry poisoning case in Wakayama. They detained this woman and they questioned her for like 3 months. I mean, it's only 90 days. They kept extending, and this is where 3 days is considered unreliable, and she never confessed. Although, again, everyone, all evidence points to that, and they actually ended up. They went to the point where they actually pointed to her non-confession almost as evidence of mental illness. Like, how could she have not confessed after all this time? There's got to be something wrong with her. So yeah, with Ghosn, they've done the old trick that they've extended the detention after they've gone past 10 days, where they were constantly reporting the content of the briefing. It turned out Ghosn and the other guy were consistently saying, those plans weren't final, they were not subject to reporting, we've done nothing wrong, we got everything checked with the lawyers and the auditors, everything's above board, nothing was improper here. So they're denying it, which is tough for one thing. So they've held up to 10 days of interrogation by Japanese police, and then Japanese police did the old trick that they switched the charge that they are detaining them on to extend for another 10 days. And when they did that, and this is something that, again, this is actually arguably a violation of human rights. Certainly it's way out of sync with international standards, but it happens routinely. It happens, all the time in Japan. They extended on this method, and yes, the French media, apart from being critical in general about how this whole thing is being done, he could be arrested again on separate suspicions. So here we go. Although Ghosn's detention period, and this is just a detention for questioning, expires after 10 days, at the latest he could be arrested again on separate suspicions and confined for up to another 20 days. This is another 20 days, so it could be up to 30 days by that. Yes, indeed. And again, then there's the question, if they do indict him, whether they'll give him bail. Given, I assume they consider him a flight risk, so they might not bail him at all. If he doesn't get bailed, cases in Japan, criminal cases, often take a year before they go to trial. So the question of whether he gets bail also determines whether he's going to be in a 3 tatami mat room that he's currently being held in, whether he's going to be held in there basically for a year without any clarity as to whether he's actually responsible or not. But yes, so I think what's interesting about this is, although this happens to everybody, and on the one hand you might say, well, this only happens when a French billionaire, the criticism only comes up when it's a French billionaire being held. True, perhaps, or Lebanese, Brazilian technically, but at the same time it does shine a light on something which otherwise most Japanese people who go through this and don't get attention paid to this. I mean, some human rights groups do bring it up. That's worth pointing out. Yeah, it's a bit dodgy, and it's probably a good thing. Again, it's a bit like the refugee issue. It's I'm a big fan of Japan in general, and all of that, but at the same time, when stuff isn't right, it's not right, and shining a light on that and bringing some accountability that wouldn't otherwise be there, it's a good thing. So it's a good thing that there's some international attention being brought to the detention practices that Japanese police routinely use for everybody. This isn't special, but it's wrong. It'll be interesting to see what sort of pressure that brings onto Japan. Another interesting big story. So you might recall the other week, it was, I believe, Kobe Steel lost a court case in Korea where basically wartime conscripted labor during World War II that was sent to work in war production factories for the Japanese government. Remembering during World War II that Taiwan and Korea were actually integrated into metropolitan Japan. Not by choice, of course. They were forcibly integrated. They were colonies, but they did have Japanese citizenship, although they had slightly differentiated rights from Japanese, but they could vote. They were Japanese citizens. And like all Japanese citizens, they were conscripted to work in Japanese factories. So the question was, at the time that Korea and Japan formed diplomatic relations, there was the question of, what about all the claims that people might have against the Japanese government for all the work, unpaid work that they were forced to do during World War II, let alone the comfort women and so on that came up later on. And it was all part of the total settlement of all of those possible claims that would inevitably come up when Japan and South Korea established diplomatic relations in 1965. That Japan paid a package of, at the time, $500 million, which obviously in 1965 that was a lot of money. with the intention of those being to settle all claims between the two countries. And the idea being that the South Korean government had the discretion to use that money to either resolve individual claims or to spend on national development, and they chose the latter. And they were a military dictatorship at the time, so they were that accountable to their people, which means that the laborers who were, basically conscripted labor, slave labor, if you like, unpaid labor in Japanese war factories that were consigned by Japanese companies to support the war effort. These people remained, having worked for a couple of years and not been paid for their labor, and these laborers were, becoming pensioners, and they felt that they were entitled to compensation, which, sounds right. So the question is, from the Japanese government's perspective, if they're entitled to compensation, that compensation has been handed over to the South Korean government, and it's the South Korean government's responsibility to distribute that compensation to these people, not for these. The purpose of the treaty was to allow Japanese companies and the Japanese government to have relations and to have operations in Korea without this hanging over them. There are 70 corporations, Japanese corporations, that operate in Korea that have links to wartime conscription and wartime industries. One is Mitsubishi Heavy, one is Kobe Steel. There are a bunch of other corporations, and there have been a bunch of trials over the years by individual claimants looking to get paid for their work that they did during World War II, being brought against the Japanese government. The courts there in Japan, they've also brought the same trials. In Japan, the courts have denied the claims based on the treaty as extinguishing the claims, and for a long time, even in Korea, the claims were extinguished on the same basis. What's happened in South Korea is that the Supreme Court of South Korea has deemed that one, that the treaty only extinguishes government-to-government claims, not personal claims against companies associated with the war like this, and two, if the treaty did extinguish personal claims like this, it would be against public policy. It would be unconscionable, and the court wouldn't be able to uphold it. And on that basis, although after 70 years of trying, they succeeded for the first time 2 weeks ago against Kobe Steel, and they succeeded again this week against Mitsubishi Heavy, which basically means that the floodgates are going to open. That all of these wartime laborers who are now in Korea are likely to bring forward class action claims against the 70 corporations, Japanese companies that have assets in Korea, with the possibility that those assets could be seized by the Korean government to pay these people the court-ordered compensation. The Korean government, which over the years, at least since they've established diplomatic relations, has said that basically has supported. For a long time, the first thing is that the Korean government was not transparent with its own people, that it took compensation. The deal, the conditions of the deal between Korea and Japan, at Korea's request, because it was a dictatorship and it didn't want its people to know that it basically sold them out, were kept secret. And in exchange for that, the Korean government just squashed all of these cases. So they were pretty bad to their own people. But that said, now that these are out, the Korean government says that they feel that they have to respect the wishes of the court, but they don't want to upset things with Japan, and they want to negotiate. Japan's kind of in a bad place with Korea at the moment, because the last time they negotiated something significant with Korea was the Comfort Women settlement, and that was undone basically within a year. They've just wound up the Comfort Women Fund, and they're refusing to distribute the money and compensation from it now because they don't want the issue resolved. So it's bad timing. This is also linked to the cycle of politics in Korea, that again, left-wing politics likes to raise the fact that right-wing people in Korea generally are associated with wartime collaborators, so it's always good to raise up wartime history politically for domestic political purposes. And it generally is a time that claims like this tend to do better in Korea. Unfortunately, as much again as I really wish that relations between Japan and Korea could improve, this is going to make things really difficult for a while. I feel terrible for the people, and they are entitled to compensation. I've maybe been in Japan too long, but if compensation was paid on with the agreement that it was to settle claims, I think that the Korean government should pay these people their compensation and figure out, whatever. If they want to get paid extra, they should do that government to government. That's my opinion. There again, I think now, based on this court decision, these Japanese companies have no choice, either to pay directly or to wrap up their operations in Korea and leave, because they can't avoid it now. The Supreme Court's issued this. Dan H., it's not a controversial statement, and Japan acknowledges that this is one of the reasons Japan doesn't have diplomatic relations with North Korea. It's because it's understood, and North Korea's raised this as well. Diplomatic relations with North Korea means a similar settlement, and it's mutual. The adding up that they did with South Korea, as it would be with North Korea, it's the same with all colonial settlements that the British Empire, the French Empire, everyone's done. It's mutual. Japan paid for a lot of infrastructure that got built. A lot of Japanese government-owned assets in Korea, starting with the power infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, roads, buildings. They put all of that in, and then they offset against that the cost and suffering of the people. Obviously, it ends up like this, and it does end up that Japan ends up paying. But it's acknowledged. And this is what Japan's been holding out as the carrot all along. If North Korea will settle the outstanding claims that Japan has that are inhibiting diplomatic relations, namely the fact it's holding somewhere between 14 and 150 Japanese citizens currently, abductees, as hostages, and it won't release them or acknowledge them. Again, some people argue that the abductee issue is being used by the Japanese government for convenience to avoid diplomatic relations, specifically because they know if they have diplomatic relations with North Korea that it would require a settlement which would involve enriching the regime over there. But the regime of Park, it was a fascist regime. It was pro-American and pro-Japanese, so it was probably easier to pay the money than it would be to pay North Korea. But in a lot of ways, it wasn't much better. It was a dictatorship that abused human rights. Japan's paid money to a terrible human rights abusing dictatorship as part of the settlement before. It wouldn't be a first. No question, this would get paid. This compensation would have to be paid to North Korea as part of having diplomatic relations. And then the same questions would come up. The intention of paying that compensation would include the claims of individual citizens. Were those included or not? So it's a really tough issue, obviously. And the thing is, even if Japan's right, it's wrong. Obviously, it's a really hard thing to argue back against. Which brings us to this. The other big controversy this week. So the Japan Times, which was recently acquired by an obscure advertising conglomerate in Japan, a Japanese advertising conglomerate, they claim to have no particular agenda. I think it was the Kyoto News, actually. They own the Kyoto News as well. They claim to have no particular agenda or whatnot, but the first kind of sign that they perhaps do have an editorial agenda maybe came up the other day when there was this convoluted editorial note. I think there's a picture in here somewhere, which basically, I think they've got the text of the editorial here, but it was with regards to the term itself, while we're on the subject of the word comfort women or sex slaves. And they issued a statement. Did they show the full statement in here? 1 second. Here it is. So here's the full statement that the editorial board of Japan Times issued the other day that seemed to upset a lot of the journalists who work at the Japan Times, and got pretty round condemnation from pretty much everyone on Twitter I see that works in the journalism community associated with Japan. Japan Times said the term forced labor has been used to refer to laborers who were recruited. So this is actually related to these factories as well. Who were recruited before and during World War II to work for Japanese companies. However, because the conditions they worked under or how these workers were recruited were varied, we will henceforth refer to them as wartime laborers. So this is actually talking about this idea as to whether these were, for example, people like to say they were unpaid workers, so let's call them all slaves. And they kind of took it neutral. But then they went further, didn't they? It also said that it would alter its description of comfort women. The newspaper noted that it had previously described such victims as women who were forced to provide sex for Japanese troops before and during World War II, but it added, because the experiences of comfort women in different areas throughout the course of the war varied widely, from today we will refer to comfort women as women who worked in wartime brothels, including those who did so against their will to provide sex to Japanese soldiers. That's a little bit more convoluted than the artist formerly known as Prince, and a little bit more awkward than that as well. So they're saying it as an alternative to comfort women. Of course, a lot of other newspapers around the world, they're pretty comfortable already calling them sex slaves. And I on the one hand, I kind of get what they're getting at. there is actually nuance both to the war labour discussion and even to the comfort women thing. The thing about comfort women, don't forget, comfort women included Japanese women, and generally they came from the Japanese Empire. So, well, let's be clear as well. The Japanese military in Indonesia abducted, used Dutch women, for example, it threw them into brothels and gang raped them. For example, there were women used as forced prostitution, but that was rape. So those things happened. They happened with the Nazis as well. So the idea that there was actual sex slavery is absolutely correct. That happened during World War II, and we know that it's not disputed because the Japanese military itself executed the Japanese army officers that were responsible for those incidents. And no question, as happens in every other war, there are probably innumerable rapes that were also never held to account or punished. So the question is about the systematic, about the comfort women system itself, which was run by the Japanese government. So there was a question about how it was operated and whether it was intended as a sex slavery system. The Japanese government has kind of defended itself, and it's you never look good defending yourself about this, but the way that they've always thrown up a defense is by saying that they had basically a system of prostitution for soldiers, basically to maintain discipline so they wouldn't go out and misbehave. The idea was that they would provide government-funded prostitution, and they claimed that it wasn't slavery because they paid people, they had receipts for it. They had accounting books associated with it. They argued that, hey, look, we paid some of the comfort women better than the soldiers. The thing is that the structure that the payments, well, one, whenever you have any system of prostitution, you're going to have human trafficking. You're going to have people who are forced into it. You're going to have people who are paid, who are sometimes not the women themselves. So there were cases of abductions, and the recruiting was not done directly by the Japanese government, but by the colonial authorities in Korea, i.e. they were using Korean police. Korean poor families were deceiving and throwing their people in. The Asahi Shimbun found a case of Japanese soldiers that said that they were, or a specific soldier who said on the island of Jeju that they had a squad where they did run around and abducted women and press gang them into the comfort women thing. And this was held up. So you see, there was actual abduction by the Japanese military that was slavery. That account became very, very controversial and disputed and taken back and whatever. But the whole point is that it's a really big, complicated thing. And the comfort woman system didn't end with the end of the war either. The comfort woman system, run by the Japanese government, and not exclusively with Japanese women either, continued throughout the occupation by the United Nations. And they became... They started out as a Japanese government-run system for Japanese soldiers. That became a Japanese government-run system for UN soldiers. If you have family that served in Japan up until 1953, chances are they used a comfort woman, or at least as likely to have used comfort women as Japanese soldiers during World War II. Highly unlikely that there were cases of non-Japanese being press ganged into it, like is possible. Well, we know from testimonies directly happened during World War II. We know that people were forced into it and people were not paid for it. So yes, is there nuance to this? Yes, but do you fully explain the nuance every time you raise the thing? I mean, in the end of the day, do you take the explanation that defends the position of the Japanese government more, or do you take the position that defends the women who were actually used as sex slaves, who were actually forced into sex against their will and never paid for it? And in the end of the day, if you choose a simplistic label or summary for it, you're going to favor the victims, if you ask me, even if there is nuance to it. And frankly, what the newspaper here has done is they've taken the kind of diplomatic line of the Japanese government trying to defend itself, which looks terrible and does a disservice to the victims. So it's unfortunate that they've done it this way, and it's going to antagonize. And the thing is, it ignores the victims the way that they put it. They've tried to be considerate and spell the whole thing, acknowledging that there was forced sex, but it wasn't always forced sex. But the thing is, even if it's correct, it still is appearing to minimize the crime that is associated with it. So it's a tough issue. The Japan Times, I don't know what they thought that they were doing. They thought this was a good idea, but it wasn't a good idea. This isn't something, there are settled terms for this that's changing that probably wasn't going to make anybody happy. And indeed, rape and pillage is a cliche. Well, yes, But especially in this case, what was sinister about the system is that it was a program that was run by the Japanese government, funded, and accounting books and everything kept. So the question about the nature of that system, obviously, because that entails accountability by the Japanese government, is what makes it slightly different from standard, what you hear every day otherwise. But yes, indeed. So what else have we got here? These are the 10 most popular companies that people currently graduating want to join. Number 1, the largest financial group in Japan, the Mitsubishi UFJ Bank. Mitsubishi Electric is number 2. Daiwa House Construction. Are you serious? Who'd want to work? Well, okay, I guess so. Number 3, Daiwa House. Number 4 is Japan IBM. Really? Number 5, Fujitsu. Number 6, Mizuho Financial Group, Daiwa Securities, and Panasonic. Those are your top 10 most popular companies for graduates. Top 8, I guess, looking at that list. Wow, that's kind of depressing that those are the top 8. I like to think people are a little bit more optimistic than that, but apparently that's for new graduates. These are well, certainly in terms of having like a secure future, they do that. But yeah. Fonts. Colis, my favorite Japanese font site, has just released some new fonts. They are awesome. If you want to get them, you can download them for free. They look really, really cool. I'm going to show them across the screen and scan them. Yeah, IBM Japan is on the list there. Really, really, all of them, basically banks and frankly dying IT companies. I don't know that I would choose anything on that list, but yes, anyway, good luck to people who do. They seem to be popular, so at least they don't have issues with hiring people. These are the fonts that you can download for free, and they're pretty cool. Sort of manga style fonts, all for free, works with kanji. I love fonts so much. Don't really like that. Nah, it's kind of good. I suppose stencil style with Japanese, if it's good if you want to do that sort of style, sort of war stuff. That's kind of cool. Blackboard Gothic. That's actually quite cool. I do like that. Blackboard style font, handwritten style font. That's kind of cool. Snack P. I quite like that, like the pop style sort of katakana and stuff. That looks quite good. I would probably go download that. I would totally download this, although I always download fonts that look like this. This actually looks good, but you'll find you actually don't really use it very much, the banban. That's kind of cool for highly stylized. But yeah, there are some really cool fonts in here. So go to colis.com if you want to check out some really cool Japanese fonts that you can download for free, because those are awesome. And I mentioned before about the in front of Japanese immigration, somebody did some graffiti. Free refugees. They put this up somewhere, and the Immigration Bureau itself in Shinagawa said, "Hey, let's not do graffiti, everybody." They basically said that freedom of expression is important, but look, this is a public place. Isn't this just a little bit too much? And they got a wave of criticism following. Well, isn't the way that you actually treat refugees much worse than this, bit of graffiti? It started a debate online. The fact that immigration itself, what's worse? The way that Japan only accepts 30 out of 20,000 refugees, or this bit of people saying, perhaps rather than spending time criticizing a bit of graffiti saying free refugees, perhaps you should actually be processing refugee applications. Both are bad. I'd certainly say, in terms of which is worse, I would certainly say that the people criticizing that have a point. Japan's GDP in the next 40 years is likely to drop 25%, just based on population loss alone, so there you go. And this is basically a woman, again, talking about the if you ever have a chance to come to Japan on an apprenticeship visa, don't. Here's a woman from Myanmar who had to work for 100 hours a week, more than 100 hours a week, for a total of $600 a month in Japan, a developed country. I don't know how you'd even live on that. I guess they lived in dorms. But yeah, Dan H, thank you very much for that. You don't have to. I do appreciate it, so thank you for that. And I mentioned before actually about, I think this is the last one that I've got. I mentioned before about the sensitivities about executive compensation. Again, most execs in Japan make between 100 200k. So a CEO getting salary of like more than $1 million is highly sensitive. Ghosn gets 10 million, and he's being accused of receiving between 50 and 80 million. So it is a sensitive subject. Yes, certainly, as the Nippon Keizai Shimbun is pointing out there, yes, it's definitely contributed to the fact that that there was a whistleblower against him and that he's now in detention. So there you go. Ariel has a question from Panama. There you go. I know you probably talked about this before on the topic of refugees, trainees and GDP, but what do you think about the Tokute Gino visa? I have talked about it before. I think it's a great idea if that's what it actually was. Obviously, the problem with the Tokute Gino, that is the special apprenticeship visa that I was just mentioning, it is being implemented in practice as a slave labor visa. Basically, farm workers, factory workers that need low-wage workers, they are deceiving people. I mean, again, what's coming out is if the intention of the visa and the system is expressly to allow people from developing countries to come to Japan to learn as apprenticeships, as apprentices, skills that they can take back and transfer to their home countries and to specifically develop transferable skills. What's happening in practice is that they're being made to do basic manual labor, and they're often being held in conditions where their passports are being taken away. They're being held under conditions of intimidation. When they escape, they're being treated as criminals for escaping the custody of their employers. The number of reported abuses of the system are basically damaging Japan's international reputation. It would be really simple to resolve if the Japanese immigration system actually policed the people who they're giving, not the immigrants, but focusing on who they're allowing these people to work for and making sure that they're actually working in proper conditions that are being protected, and they're not. So I think that the system is an interesting idea. But either the visa is a scam run by the Japanese government, where it intentionally intends to allow people to come and work as slaves in rural farms, and in Fukushima in some cases just doing manual work for almost no pay under conditions of duress and intimidation, and that's the intention of the Japanese government, and that the wording of the law is dishonest, or the Japanese government isn't properly enforcing the law and they're allowing the abuses to happen. And it's a problem that basically there's no system to protect the people that are coming in. The most optimistic people are proposing the latter. Either way, it's a failed system. But certainly, the lack of, at the same time as they're expanding the number of foreigners coming into Japan, the lack of action to correct the serious problems that are clear about the Tokute Gino visa that you're highlighting there, Ariel, is a serious concern. It's what the opposition is raising as well. And I think Japan, again, they don't want the GDP to fall by 25%. They need foreign workers to come, and they're not going to attract them if Japan's got a reputation as a country that abuses migrant workers. So they have to address it. And that is my opinion about that I've said before. So there we go. Build a wall, indeed, James O'Hara. That's the other alternative. Just build a wall. So there you go. And it's not as bad as Dubai and not as bad as China and whatnot. But yeah, it's the same sort of problems. The same things that happen in any country if you don't police to protect the most vulnerable people from abuse in this sort of situation. Tim the Asian Ink, good to see you. So look, that's all the topics that I've got. I said I don't have a lot to talk about. I'm going to run out of time, and I've just gone over an hour. So there you go. As is always the case, I've managed to sort of keep up with the whole thing. I hope you guys are all well. Have a very, very good week, everybody. Thanks for joining. Remember, we have to build the wall to be able to tear it down, indeed. If you like the show, remember to like. Thank you for the support. Enjoy doing this every week. They have a wall, it's the ocean, indeed. Look, have a good week, everybody. Thank you for joining, especially, I know I didn't give a lot of heads up today, but you know what time it is. It's the same time every week, and it's great to see you all. Thanks, Kang and Kodos, and thank you for everybody for joining. Have a good week. Ka kite ano, which is New Zealand for Maori for keep cool till after school. Peace. Boom.